Good evening and welcome to our event, which is part of the 2020 Festival of Social Science, funded by the Economic and Social Research Council. In the next couple of hours, we're going to discuss mental health in new parenthood, with a particular focus on fathers' perinatal mental health and the cultures that surround it. The discussion is going to be centered around and inspired by the themes that the play and now audio drama, Cracking, highlights. We hope you've had the chance to listen to the three-part drama that's been launched this week, but we'll be hearing snippets from it this evening anyway, and I'll explain how we'll use those in a moment. This event's been organised by the University of Warwick and by All Right Mate, who are an award-winning arts organisation, and they're the creators of Cracking. But I'll leave Hugh and Callie from All Right Mate to introduce themselves in a moment. I'm Mark Pulsford. I'm from the University of Warwick, and my job tonight is to introduce and to chair the discussion. I work in education studies at Warwick, and I teach undergraduate students about sociology of childhood, education policy, and of relevance this evening is that I run a module on men, masculinities and fatherhood. And via a little research project I was doing, I was in contact with All Right Mate, and that's kind of led us here this evening. Tonight, we're going to be hearing from a small band of campaigners, educators, artists, service providers, and experts through first-hand experience. The background to our discussion is the growing but relatively small amount of attention being given to men's and fathers' mental health in recent years. A key area of campaigning here is focused on the experiences and level of support in the perinatal period. We know this can be a valuable time as new parents adjust, and that recognising and supporting fathers' mental health is not only crucial for the fathers themselves, but it's also a vital piece of the jigsaw to secure the well-being of their partners and their babies. So that's the context for the discussion tonight. So let's get on with the introductions. First of all, can I ask Julian Bowes, would you briefly introduce yourself?
Hello, yes, thank you, Mark. My name is Julian Bowes. I'm the founder of DadPad, a set of guides and an app that we developed with the NHS to help new fathers have all the information they need when the health visitors are gone and they're home with their new baby, and it helps them get on with some of the co-shared parenting, and also to help the services engage with fathers in a much more meaningful way.
Brilliant. Thank you, Julian. Jodie Dowse.
Hi, hello. My name's Judy. I am operations manager for Bluebell Care, and we provide support for mums and dads postnatally, antenatally. Yeah.
Thank you, Jodie. Nikwa Marawa.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Nichwat. I'm the co-founder of the award-winning mental health community interest company, The Delicate Mind. So The Delicate Mind is an interfaith organization that specifically has a focus on the BME and the Muslim diaspora, but our work is obviously interfaith, so we work with everybody. So we've worked in education settings, public health bodies, faith institutions, prisons, youth sectors, all that kind of stuff. I'm not here to plug myself, so thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, brilliant. And we've got Dr. Emma Langley.
Hi, yeah, I'm Emma Langley. I'm a researcher at Warwick. My research is primarily interested in the well-being of parents, specifically those that are raising a child with a disability, but also parenting more broadly. I'm also very interested in fathering and fatherhood and the theory behind that. And more recently, I've been leading an ESRC project that has focused specifically on fathers of children with disabilities, and that has involved some co-production with fathers to create a resource for the fathers.
Lovely, thank you very much. And Hugh McCann from All Right Mate. Hold on, Hugh, I think you're muted.
Oh, there had to be one. Hello, I'm Hugh from All Right Mate. So we're essentially myself and Callie Hayes. It's a company that's a couple of years old now, and we've worked with sports clubs, construction companies, veterans groups, general people, barbershops, and different workplaces to deliver plays, talks, audio-visual installations. We've written a couple of books. And the aim of everything we do is to sort of normalise conversations around male mental health by having conversations with people and then finding the best outlet to share those conversations back with communities for whom that might be of benefit.
Brilliant, thank you, Hugh. And Callie Hayes, who's going to tell us a little bit about cracking.
Hello, my name is Callie Hayes, and I'm a writer and mental health nurse and co-director of All Right Mate. And how cracking came about was that until quite recently, I'd worked in perinatal mental health for 10 years, and I'd been inspired to write a piece in response to the fact that suicide is always in the top 3 leading causes of maternal death in the postnatal period. And so in talking with families, talking with mums and dads about their experience of postnatal illness, in creating the play, it became quite clear to me that actually the impact on men and on fathers is neither acknowledged nor are their emotional needs supported. And so cracking then developed into more of a story from the father's perspective, and that's what hopefully some of you have heard throughout the festival. We performed it as a live stage show last year and also the early part of this year, and because of COVID and the pandemic, we were thinking, how could we still bring this story to people's attention? So that's how we ended up making it into an audio drama, and we were sponsored to do that by Julian and Dadpad, which we're very appreciative of. So what we'll be hearing today is that parts of that audio drama of the story from a father's perspective.
Brilliant, thank you, Callie. Can I just check? I think we had 2 other potential panelists, and if they've been able to log in, then great to say hello to them. But if they're not here, then we can move on. They might join us in a bit. Thanks very much.
Mark, I think Amelie is going to be joining us. She's just putting her children to bed.
Yeah, super. Yeah, it's happening upstairs here, and I'm just hoping that the bedtime and bath time kind of routine doesn't sort of spill over down here. Perfect. Hello, Amelie Foster, just in time. Would you like to introduce yourself, Amelie?
Hello.
Hi. Hello. Amelie, would you just introduce yourself?
Yes, certainly. Sorry, I'm Amelie Foster, and I'm a lived experience mum who was very luckily supported by Callie Hayes to my left here when I experienced severe postnatal depression and anxiety back in 2013.
Great. It's great to have you with us. Thanks, Amelie. Okay, so I'm just going to take a minute just to explain the format of the panel discussion, and then we'll get into the main discussion in a moment or two. So we've got 2 hours in total, and we'll have a short break about halfway through, so about 8:35 if all goes to plan. So far, we're on track, so it's good news. The discussion is going to be organised around 3 short clips from cracking. So we'll play those, and then we'll ask an opening question to the panel, and we'll see where the discussion goes from there. If you're watching this live, you can ask a question or make a comment. So just put those in the comments box below the video, and we'll do our best to incorporate those as we go. So feel free to pop a question for our panel in there. Now, before we start, we wanted to point out that some of the clips might be quite raw and quite difficult to listen to, and the topics we'll inevitably cover may trigger some emotions that perhaps you weren't expecting, or perhaps that you're very familiar with. And so we just wanted to note that before we began, as well as to say, and to echo Hugh's point earlier, that the wider aim is to normalise conversations about male mental health. And so that's the sort of broader picture here. Okay, so we're going to move to our first clip and our first kind of segment. So this first clip from Cracking is from a scene that's set 2 years after the character Rachel was ill with postnatal depression, and this is the couple's first counselling session. It's on its way.
everything's my fault. Like, I caused all of this upset and now you're punishing me.
How am I punishing you?
You know how.
Well, no, I don't.
You still don't think I'm better, do you?
It's not true.
Well, then what is it? Well, why don't we have sex anymore?
Why are you having a go at me?
I'm not. I just thought once I got better, we would get back to how we were.
Yeah, but you're kind of dumping all of them.
I'm trying to be honest.
So it's my fault.
After what we've been through, I wouldn't blame you if you didn't want to. I thought some terrible things. To get Thomas adopted.
Okay, so the first question to the panel to get the discussion started, prompted by that clip, is why are men and fathers reluctant to discuss mental health? So I'd like, if we can, to kick off with Julian to respond first of all to that question. Thanks, Julian.
Okay, well, what a question to start with. Let's try and do battle with this one.
It's not an easy gig.
So my initial response, and I haven't written lots of answers down because I wanted it to be really interactive with others as well, so we can kind of fire off each other. I think it'll work best that way for me anyway. I've got a lot of lived experience working with men, quite a few, 20,000 plus hours working in the probation service with men, all stages of life, and also interviewing thousands of men as I developed stuff for the NHS for new fathers. And to answer the question about why fathers are reluctant to talk about mental health, it is probably dependent on the fact that men find it difficult, to talk about mental health issues. Maybe, and there's so many different factors that you will chip in with, I'm sure. And Mark, you've talked about masculinity and people's identification of what male is. And how that's been taught to them through the ages, social learning theory. They've absorbed a lot of beliefs and attitudes, rightly or wrongly, in my experience, around, big boys don't cry, from all these kind of glib throwaway remarks all the way through to, it's a sign of weakness, and men have got to project strength, and if they don't, might is right, and all these things into play to bring this kind of notion that they have to project a certain way and be a certain way. But when it comes to fatherhood, they're transferring that pattern of behavior for the same reasons onto their blueprint that they have had since they were young, potentially from their parents, or as they've grown up through different decades. And unless we try to look at teaching them a different language around emotions, because a lot of men struggle, in my opinion, and in my experience, with naming their emotions and understanding what's going on internally to be able to voice it, then there's that pressure too. If they can't say what they're feeling because they don't know how to describe it, and people aren't engaged with them in order to draw those feelings out, then it's very difficult for them to certainly ask for help, express the emotion, and then receive help. And it's particularly, again, if they're battling with some of those, what they would see as social norms of they shouldn't really be talking about their emotions because they're battling that internally. So I would also like to say we need to be engaging the men more. So if we had the other side of it, where the services were making it more normal, like we're doing here, the services were making it easier for men to talk, and through projects such as these, this is what we hopefully will move towards, then you will start to see men feeling it's normal that at significant stages or life events such as pregnancy and fatherhood, that they're able to start expressing more emotions. And it has to start in, as you say, as we've always said, in education and through schools. But for fatherhood, it kind of has to start when they realise they're going to be a father, because in my opinion, it doesn't become real until they know that they're going to become a father. So it's quite a difficult tipping point already, which is why it's such a crucial period, that perinatal time.
Yeah.
Please feel free to chip in, because I don't want to be starting to go down some rabbit hole and putting my foot in my mouth like I can do.
Cheers, thank you. Cheers, Julian. I wondered, Emma, if you had any thoughts kind of around men and masculinity and that kind of area. That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was sort of ready to jump in and say, yeah, I think in terms of what you were talking about, Julie, in terms of socialisation, what we expect for boys when they're growing up. You must be tough, you must be stoic, you must be in control. All of those things that we might directly or indirectly teach children as they're growing up, that's going to have an impact when they become a father, because there are going to be situations like becoming a new dad, like experiencing mental health difficulties, that's really going to challenge that and put fathers in a place where they don't feel comfortable, or they don't necessarily recognise that they're not feeling comfortable. So I think we do have to draw upon these wider masculinity theories and theories around what fatherhood actually means. And obviously that's changed over time. The fact that we're having this conversation today shows that it's important for us to be doing. So I really do feel that we have to start early in terms of thinking about gender norms.
Can I just come back to that and say, whenever I've talked to all the health trusts, when I'm trying to work with them, what's getting through is that everyone understands that over the last 20, 30, 40 years, in particular, us as guys, it's very broad brush, but as men, as boys, we've very much been living in that culture where it's projected into us unknowingly. Just as like it is for girls when they know they're the ones going to be giving birth, so the matriarchy and everything society kind of prepares them for that, whereas men have been allowed to like wander towards it without any kind of thought given about what it's like to have a newborn at home, you know, that you never leave the house the same again, as Michael McIntyre said. And if we had done that, things would be different. So there's such a long way to go. We've got to start in a place where we do look at some and changing some of those messages that get to those boys. You know, even in perinatal mental health circles, they're still calling things the pinks and the blues. They're still following those norms of language and behaviour. And I see it in the staff group who are even older, who grew up with those kinds of even older attitudes in terms of the roles, defined roles, and less intervention and less talk about feelings. So we've got a lot of work to do that way. And that's why I think for the engagement part is just with the staff on the ground that talk to men is just as important as letting men know that it's normal to cry, it's normal, that's a sign of strength rather than weakness, and those kinds of things, and that failure is good, and all the kind of things that we know now with evidence that's been emerging over 18 to 20 years, that we start putting that into practice and doing. So, and I think that's where that's what helped answer the question, is why the reluctance. We can get rid of that reluctance by normalising it. Yeah, for both sides.
I think also that certainly with some of the dads that I worked with when I was a perinatal mental health nurse, is that actually not only are their needs not being acknowledged when their partner is suffering from a really serious mental illness, but they are actually bearing the burden of the care and the responsibility in keeping their partner safe and keeping their baby safe. And I think they're also having to, navigate the fact that the person who, they've had this baby with is unrecognisable to them, and they're frightened. And so there is this sort of survival mode of, I've just got to keep my head down, I've just got to try and keep doing things to keep us all safe. And I'm not sure I'm allowed to have a feeling, because what she's going through is 10 times worse than what I'm going through. And I mean, I'm sure Jodie and Amelie have those sort of experiences too.
Yeah, I was very much going, I'm just going to almost mirror what you just said, Callie, to be honest. But I was going to say, I think there's very much a reluctance to dump on mum, so to speak. It's that feeling of, well, she's already going through all of this. The last thing I now want to do is say, oh, by the way, I'm not feeling great. So if you could also have that would be brilliant. And I think it comes back to that thing where, as Julian was saying, kind of being programmed to deal with things by themselves, and to hold this all by themselves is something that we really need to work on. They are also not alone. And, there is this thing about how we go about teaching dads the right language for after a baby is born. So I think it's very difficult sometimes for dads to put into words that soft feeling that they feel for their baby, and kind of that softer, gentle language. And I think that can be really scary and quite confusing for a dad, obviously generalizing very much so, but you go from that tough bravado with your friends and perhaps even your partner, and then all of a sudden in one swift moment you want to be, oh, my little baby, and I love you so much. That's huge. And I think having a bit of a more conversation around that change and that language would be such a great thing to bring to new dads.
You're so right, Jodie. And think about all the changes that happen for men that people that they aren't aware of. Testosterone dropping to sometimes pre-teen levels. The fact that they don't know that means they're going to lose some competitive edge. They are going to feel differently. They can feel hormonally different. They can feel sympathetic morning sickness. There's stuff that goes on that they won't be able to describe because no one's telling them or giving them a frame of reference. So if we started to, then at least they understand that something is happening, where it's coming from. And then they can verbalize it if we teach them that language you've talked about. And then you prepare them with the same language that mum gets as well from the NHS. And then you are able to have conversations that he's not locking it all in together. So absolutely, I'd recommend that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, one of the things when I did the panel the first time was my partner, my second child. I had really severe postnatal depression with my first, and my second, I was all ready, and I was like, right, if it happens, I've got this. And he went and got it, and I was like, what's happening here? And all of a sudden he really shut down and he really struggled and he ended up on medication, and he was like, I just don't know. I don't know. And that was all he could ever say, was he just didn't know how he felt. And you're so right, Julian, that hormone change in them. I don't know many dads that would say, oh yeah, I knew that was going to happen. I didn't know that happened until
I haven't come across one yet. That's why we're trying to teach them this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how amazing would that be? And it's so important. I couldn't agree more.
Jodie, I just wanted to pick up on that idea that you said just now around men not feeling they wanted to sort of dump on their partners, if like, well, I've got problems too, sort of thing, and feeling like they have to kind of keep it in because of that pressure. And it made me think about the sorts of support networks that men have, and if men don't ever really talk about, that's not the basis of their friendship to share feelings, and often their partner is that person that they, that's their support network, that's the person that they will share any emotions with, and so what happens, when that's gone, what do they do and where do they go? And I wondered if, Nikwa, you had any thoughts around, because you work with men and within different sort of support networks, and I wonder if kind of there's anything from your experience there.
Yeah, so I just want to echo a couple of things that everyone said. So first and foremost, I definitely agree in the basis of socialization as to what it means to be a man. So, can you still hear? No? Yes? Excellent.
Yeah.
So some of it comes down to the socialization of what it means to be a man. So fundamentally, if I ask one of you guys here, what does it mean to you to be a guy, or what does it mean to be a man? It will be radically different and informed by your lived experience and your life experiences as well. So the reason I say that this question is quite important. So some of the work that we've done has been in prisons, and specifically male-only jails. And the men that we worked with or work with are sex offenders. So this is, and if you know me, you know that this is one of my big gripes, and that's a whole other story and a whole interesting learning situation I've had as well. Now, whilst I was in that setting, I developed their own peer-to-peer support that they could have. There were other men within that institution and within that environment who they felt able to talk to. But it was quite interesting because there was a very clear racial divide. So the prison within itself was specifically mostly men from the ages of 50 and mostly white males. And then there's a few ethnic minorities who mostly sort of got together, and their lived experience of masculinity and being men was radically different from what it was to people who were coming from a Caucasian background. So racial epithets play a big role in relation to that as well. So we all get socialized radically differently in the basis of our culture, ethnicity, our gender, our socioeconomic status. That always plays a really significant and really big part as to how we experience the world. And just to go back to echo a little bit what Jodie was saying, I really agree in the sense of not dumping something upon your partners. So what we found through our own research and what I've empirically come across as well is there's this idea that you take upon what it means to be a guy. So being the breadwinner, being really strong. And I know that I've definitely in my life ingrained a lot of that myself. So I used to be, let's say, a bit chubby, and I took a lot of time to exercise, a lot of time to work out. And then later on, I had this conversation with my friends who's also a guy, and I said, how much of that was me doing it of my own accord, and how much of that was the things that I'd socialized over time. And we really spent hours discussing that, to be quite honest with you. And it's still something to this day I'm trying to understand, to recognize whether this was of my own distinction or whether this was something I put upon towards myself. But going back to the breadwinner point, what can tend to happen is when you don't feel, or at least men don't feel comfortable or able to discuss and have discussions with their partners emotionally, to step away from being mentally strong. This can inform itself in domestic violence. There can be breakdowns in relationships because there's this idea internally that I have to be strong, I have to show this sort of forms. And instead of showing that emotional vulnerability, it can inform itself in physicality. And unfortunately, we've become much too aware of this being quite commonplace. However, just to touch upon something earlier, which again I really resonated with, in reference to suicide being one of the biggest killers of young men, 90% of people who die by suicide at some point in their life have some sort of mental health issue or have had some form of problem. So obviously there is more of a distinction that needs to be made about people who are affected by this. And this is partly as to, I think it's not all doom and gloom though, because we are here having this conversation and people are leading by example to try and put these things forward and provide solutions to them. The best example being with ourselves. So we're developing a men's mental health service, and it's for all self-identifying men. And the reason we call it self-identifying is because we want it to be trans-inclusive, gender non-binary inclusive, all of that stuff. It's very important. And some of the research we found has been really interesting. So we asked guys, what would you like to see? What are some of the things that you want to talk about? And some of the topics were really interesting. So for example, something from a male perspective was body image. And that's not something that a lot of guys think about, I think. It said body dysmorphia, which came up, which I thought was fascinating. Anger, which I thought, again, was really interesting. So the idea of how you process anger and how to utilize it. Because again, I think anger as emotion is specifically put onto guys. And I think that needs to be broken apart healthily as well. Then, of course, there was the typical stuff around depression and anxiety and relationships and healthy sexual relationships. That came up quite a lot as to what men would like to see discussed even further. So I think we have to really get in towards this. But stuff like this is excellent. We're leading by example. We're slowly starting to pave the way. It's going to take a long time to change these conversations. So conversations happen bit by bit by bit by bit, and it takes time to get us there. So it's excellent that something like this exists. I'm going to be quiet now because I think I've spoken much too much. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. I think that's a really good point there. When you ask men what they want, they'll tell you that those things flow from that kind of open door. If the door's opened, and that's an important point, isn't it? I think we haven't heard from Amelie on this, and I wondered, Amelie, about your experience, your view on why men and fathers would be reluctant to discuss mental health. What's your view? I think Amelie's there. Maybe not.
Whilst we wait for Amelie, can I just say something about anger and all the umbrella words that men they kind of will emit anger and they'll emit emotion, but the underlying words, unless we start looking at teaching our society the language, so these boys come through the system through their childhood with a language that allows them to speak more openly, the topics that we're talking now about might not be the ones that necessarily they need to be talking about because it's framed in the current language they have. I know it's quite a roundabout way of saying that we need to do both things. We need to look after the current population and we need to look at prevention at the same time. And for so long, we've been looking at the not prevention end, that if we don't keep that stake in the sand and go prevention, 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 you are going to keep having these longer term. And you know, my work with probation was 14 years with domestically violent offenders and sex offenders and cognitive change programs. And you know, to a man, they looked back on their life saying, you know, everything was stuff really. What I really wanted out of life was to be a good father and partner. Now they'd failed on both of those things, but that's what they've talked about. You get to a certain age and you look back, and we wonder why a lot of my offenders, when they hit 40 plus, they were drugs, drink, suicide. And it kind of stems back to that perinatal period, that 0 to 2, where you can do so much because men are more motivated. They recognize it's a triggering event at some point, but just normally they recognize it a bit too late. We just need to capture that early and start talking and getting the language, getting them understanding the language. And then maybe they'll have networks in place and not feel they have to dump it on mum, but they'll also be able to have a side conversation with the right people in the right language, not just going down and speaking to a friend down the pub who will just reinforce your bad stereotypes and your beliefs that are a bit distorted, but have real conversations and find other men. That's why the men's networks and, you know, things that you're putting together are going to be so helpful, and that we can refer them to. But there has to be this focus on fathers, but we also need to teach fathers to focus in some sense. They've got to take some personal responsibility here. But they can't start that until we say, you're important and we need to speak to you. So that's how we start that process.
Yeah, you ended it with exactly what I was going to kind of lead with, just saying 100%. That with a lot of men or a lot of dads, especially, it's that not making themselves a priority and thinking, you know, my role is to make sure that everybody else in my family is, you know, functioning to their best and happy and healthy and provided for. And again,
it's more objectivity you want them to have. Which is what I've spent years trying to teach men, objectivity. But and it's been so difficult to look at how we do that. Everyone's laughing now. How do we do that? But absolutely, we want them to be able to find some new ways, because we don't want to just keep playing into that toxic masculinity playbook. Because holding on to that emotion and letting it knot up is just playing into that toxic masculinity play out, and that's why the men cope, but typically they'll drop off the cliff once mum's got slightly better. Like Callie has in the play, talks about how it runs alongside, men try and cope and it drops off a bit. So we need to figure out how we can make them cradle safe too.
And do you think that sometimes, sorry, Julian,
sorry,
I didn't cut you off. No, I was sort of talking openly, just in the sense that sometimes do you think that dads struggle when mum's been really unwell and they've been really needed for that whole time, and they know that mums need them and they're supporting and that supportive role, and then when mum gets better, all of a sudden they're not needed in that role anymore and they lose that kind of feeling of purpose, and it's that feeling, what am I now? Whether
it's partly because it's just a change again, and people do badly in change depending on how good you are with change. So that probably lends itself into someone feeling worse, that there's suddenly a vacuum of stuff that they were doing. You know, the routine and the rigidness of a framework of this is my existence for a while, and then they didn't see the end coming, and then suddenly things have changed and there's a whole switch over, isn't there? So but all we're making the case for is support all the way along. You know, we need to have these peer mentors or dad academy type men, advocates who can talk to men at these stages and just check in and work alongside. Or it's not, for me, it wouldn't be rocket science. You can pen this out quite easily. It's just a case that we've just got to, about 10 years old now. We've just got to try and get that.
I've heard it. I really like advocates.
Yeah, advocates are good for, I've not heard that before.
Well, advocacy services is what you're all building. What I wrote down 10 years ago before the crash. It was a dad academy. All men from all walks of life, role modelling what the different pathways for men are, and then we bring new dads to that attention. So if their patterns of behaviour from their parents about not talking about feelings, for example, don't help them, they can look at other dads and go, this is the other options. Because you can't play other options and that you can't jump one way with a decision unless you've got other decisions to jump to. So we've got to feed them with this kind of food.
I think one of the reasons why
100%.
we toured Cracking to local community groups last year, so that we could, after the performance, we had a post-show talk, and Amelie was on that post-show talk with us, and Julian when we came to Cornwall, and Jodie when we came to Bristol, just to start to have a conversation with the people who'd seen the piece, to actually think about what is it that both men and women could do differently in this perinatal period. Because when listening to, you know, what you were saying about men being conditioned and what have you, I was thinking about my own conditioning. I mean, my children are in their 20s now, but you know, but I remember strongly feeling like it was my business. I didn't really include my partner in that pregnancy journey at all, because I didn't know how to. And you know, in the time that I've spent working in perinatal mental health, you know, it's made me reflect more on the fact that actually it seems really important to be having conversations with your partner about, you know, if we do decide to have children, you know, what sort of dad do you think you're going to be? You know, what sort of mum am I going to be? What's our shared values about how we raise our children? Are we going to, you know, are we going to sort of have the same views on how we discipline or how we comfort? I think it's something that both men and women need to be thinking through and having a shift, you know, challenging your own sort of conditioning. And
it starts with conversation, Callie, doesn't it? Yeah. Right. It's got to be conversation, because just remember, until your front and back brains aren't really linking up till mid-20s. So you've got all these young kids thinking a lot about themselves, and obviously will buy into that kind of, well, this is my bit and this is my bit. And mums have got to have that conversation too. We've got to convince those mums by putting the evidence in front of them, saying, well, if you don't include dad, if you don't let him build confidence with baby, if you don't have him involved, then 2 years down the line, when you want to go and do other things, you won't trust him to be able to do any parenting. You will then have to do that, and then potentially you're not going to be able to self-actualize in the things that you want to do. And that's evidenced by these Radio 4 programs where, do I have to mention other forms of radio and broadcast are available at this point? They've evidence with psychiatrists. They have people, the men on the couch going, I had no role to play. I wasn't allowed to get close to the baby, or mother-in-law took over because he was useless, and we haven't got a relationship anymore. And you do get these splits occurring now, and they're evidenced, and it's rooted in the fact that yes, it is a mum and a dad trying to figure out what I would call something. It's a vulnerable state of being, pregnancy, for both parents. It's about, and so if we can start them having that conversation really early during pregnancy with support, they've got a better chance of coming together and making better decisions for that baby, and understanding at least each other's position, and just having some help earlier rather than letting it go to a crisis when they have to put lots of other support in then, which is absolutely needed. It's just a case of you could catch it a little bit earlier.
No, I just add, really quickly in regards to sort of the early intervention, which, you know, we've talked about a lot here. Also, the language around mental health. What does mental health actually mean? Well, it's not just the presence of those difficulties and waiting for things to get worse over time, which they tend to do, but actively encouraging fathers and mothers as well to think about what mental health actually means. You know, the broader idea of looking after ourselves, being productive, being fruitful, all of those things that the World Health Organization tells us to do, and being proactive. And I think that really leads into just having this conversation and really breaking down the language around mental health more generally.
And I think the earlier we do that, the more confidence people get earlier, and confidence will breed the conditions for people being proactive. But the more someone experiences the depressive feelings or anxiety or insecurity or jealousy or fear, that will grow and stay with them for longer periods. So the earlier we can work on it, the better. And I absolutely agree. But we've got to build that empowerment and confidence to get the resilience for those kids and those families later on. And I think this has been the gap that's happened. And we might have just walked into it just because we've got so used to structures and systems in a certain way. But it's time for a shift and a shake-up. And I know that maternity know that they need to change. They know that. They're just, again, 95 female-led workforce who need to know how to put their own histories behind and talk to men in a certain way, help mum understand the position around the family, but that could take a lot more training. But that's why it's so exciting that projects like this exist, because there are people out there trying to understand that framework to offer it to kind of the people in power to make the changes on the ground.
Okay, so I'm trying to keep to time, so I'm going to just move us on to the next section. And so we talk kind of generally, broadly about, and then also quite specifically. I'm sure we'll come back to these themes. We've talked quite broadly about men and reluctance and the barriers to talking about mental health. But this next clip takes us quite tightly into the early days of Sam and Rachel, sort of navigating that early days of new parenthood. So the new parents, Sam is just back at work after his paternity leave, and Rachel's postnatal depression has not yet been diagnosed. So clip number 2.
Please don't go to work today.
I said I have to.
Please don't leave me.
I couldn't not go in again.
I don't want to be on my own.
I'll tell her I'll call you at lunchtime.
Sam, please. No, I don't want you to go. No, give me the keys.
What are you doing?
Okay, so Sam and Rachel navigating that really tricky period where Rachel's postnatal depression has not yet been diagnosed. They're not sure what's going on between them and for each other. The question we've got to start us off is, how do fathers keep going in that perinatal period? How do they keep going through the mental health problems that, first of all, their partners experience? And we'll talk as well about their own mental health difficulties. But first of all, how do men keep going? In your experiences, how are men kind of getting through the perinatal mental health problems of their partners? Amelie, I wonder if we could come to you first. Oh, no.
I think she's experiencing some, significant Wi-Fi issues, and good on her for keep trying to come back.
Yeah. Okay, so we won't go to Amelie first. Jodie, I wonder if you could start us off, if that's all right, and then we'll kind of flow from there, really. So, how do men keep going? What do they do to keep going through those mental health problems with their partner?
I think I hate going in with what sounds like a really negative start, actually, but I will go with it, and we'll see where it leads us. But I think one thing that we see a lot, so with Bluebell, we have our Dads in Mind team who support dads, antenatally and postnatally. And we see it's a lot of distraction techniques, whether that's work, going out with friends, whatever it might be. I think there's so much confusion and fear around, what mum's going through, which is through a lack of understanding, understandably. And I think, there can be a lot of, we joke a lot as mums, saying, he's gone off to watch the football again, or he's gone out with his friends again, or he's going here and there. And it wasn't until I had children myself that I thought it's because he doesn't know what else to do. And he literally needs that time to process. It's not so much that he doesn't want to be with our baby and he doesn't want to be around me. He literally doesn't know what else to do. And I think sometimes that's their way of coping, and it's that jokey element with friends and family, she's gone mental again, so I'm going out, and that language again, it's our, I don't know, she's having a moment, or whatever it might be. And I think that escapism can be such a huge part in the beginning. And I think I like to think on a positive, we have a lot of dads that go away and do their own research. So they kind of go on the quiet and, go on to Google, and they Google, oh, why is my girlfriend crying all the time? We've just had a baby. And actually, I think that happens again a lot more than we think, but they don't want to say that they've been up at 2 a.m. and feeding baby with one hand whilst Googling, why am I a terrible father? It's just heartbreaking. And I think, yes, we're going to repeatedly come back to these preventative measures. But again, I think it's just normalizing that for dads is a really good start. But yeah, to start a bit negatively, I guys, I do apologize. But yeah, I think that's what we see a lot of, that distraction.
Yeah, finding the coping mechanisms in some way or another. Yeah.
The
Emma,
language doesn't help. Sorry,
I
was just saying the language doesn't help if society talks about that whispering language of, oh, she's gone mental, or this, because there are men out there who just that's not what's going on there. I know what's going on, but actually it's more isolating because they're hearing it. But it's piling guilt onto the mum again because she understands that, and evidence-based females do experience guilt and shame more than men, and you're piling that onto the mums by perpetuating that kind of language and not treating the situation with the seriousness it deserves. Yeah. Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, Emma, I was just going to ask around, I guess, the sort of the dynamics in families and sort of the different pressures around the different, roles and responsibilities. And I just wondered if you had, comment and thoughts around that, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as we were talking about sort of gender roles around fatherhood, there's also those expectations for mums around motherhood as well, and how mums and dads should be interacting with each other and the kind of relationship that they should have. I think, from listening to the podcast prior to this, there was also the mention of sort of seeing other couples and seeing other families that were happy, and why aren't we happy, and why shouldn't we be like that? So again, breaking down that perception that everybody has that perfect life is really, really important. I also think from sort of talking to a group of dads recently that they do end up in this position where they are sidelined from family life. Sometimes they don't know necessarily how they've got there. They don't know how to get out of it. But it seems the comfortable position to be there and not to challenge that, and they don't know how to challenge that. But we do have to think carefully about overall sort of how families interact and the sort of processes that are going on. Each family is going to be completely different, so it is really hard to support for that. We do have to understand that having a child doesn't just affect one person in that couple, it affects both and how they interact with one another.
Yeah.
I think there are, big economic drivers for men to, go to work, keep going in that postnatal period. So thinking about the piece that we've just heard, a lot of men aren't entitled to that 2 weeks paid paternity, particularly if they're in quite insecure employment, or it's temporary contracts, or it's the gig economy, or any of what number of things really. So there are huge pressures on men to get out there and keep working, and I think it must be so difficult and so stressful for that man to be out there at work trying to concentrate on his job when actually he wants to be at home. He's not sure what's going on. He doesn't know what he's going to find when he walks back through the door, really. So it's a much wider sort of societal thing too, isn't it, in that we're not really we don't have the infrastructure that supports fathers to really take a bigger role in family life.
Not yet economically, but the companies, it is a thing. It's called work family conflict, WFC. There are certain big businesses, Citibank in London, have an amazing father-facing program of support. They've won awards for it. It happened a few years back, but it's very quiet. No one seems to know. And I'm just thinking, well, legislation's moving. They've moved with the times. They support them with videos. They support them with lots of different ways, and they encourage it because they know that if you send a dad back to work and he's not happy with what's going on at home, then what would you call it, under what the COVID measurement, they've done it a lot, and they work productivity just drops completely, and they can't focus, and they're feeling worse about work then later, so it has long knock-on effects. So just by doing a bit of supporting at home, maybe moving with the times, if we can convince these companies that this is what needs to happen, couples need that extra support during this period of time as we move, because we've seen culture shift in different countries, haven't we? Finland, Sweden, Norway. Happiness index, more equal society, less working work week, more shared care. It's working, and it might be something we want to move towards. There's just a lot of people holding it back, and that's where your money argument comes in, Callie. There's probably institutions. Law is one of them. They rarely take paternity leave, but there are people out there. There's a guy that we did a blog with called John. I'll have to come back with the name of the organisation. Very much focusing on this area around paternity leave and how we need to encourage more of that and encourage support from the companies back to employees. So that, again, like Emma was saying, it becomes normal. It becomes, the perception of it changes, that it is acceptable to do these things. And that's the nudges and the whispers, I think, would help, particularly. The only issue you have is those men, some of them like to go to work because they can't cope with the stress situation that they're feeling at home. And that's where we need to come in with the other help as well to support them through that.
Yeah, I think mostly on a personal level, just kind of to say that it really resonates with me, Callie. It's always the sentence that someone says it really gets the feels, because it was for him, my partner he really didn't know when he was coming home from work. And I mean, to imagine what that felt like in watching that clock down to leaving work and thinking, when I walk in the door, is she going to be okay? Is she not going to be okay? Or how am I going to be expected to speak? Yesterday I went in and I said this. If I go in and say it today, am I going to get the same reaction? And I think it's only being on the other side that it's allowed me to see that, and how stressful that must be. To have to think about that and to keep, like the question is, how do they keep going through that? I think my answer actually would be, I really don't know. I really don't know. And again, it comes back to these preventative measures and finding out, that's the work that our Dads in Mind team do, how are you getting through this? What are your coping mechanisms? Can we improve those to make them work better? Yeah, it really does just keep coming and looping back to that, doesn't it?
You're building their resilience, aren't you, at Bluebell? So you build their resilience skills and give them a reframe of reference. You each time having to steady them, going, just remember your partner's not well. You're coping like you can. We're trying to make you think every time you walk towards that door, just remember, do these things, first of all, understand it's not your fault. It's not. These are the things that where you're going to be. So it's all the kinds of. So these things can be done, but we've just got to make it more normal for these things to be done and recognised.
Yeah, it's the biggest part of our work. Is normalising it for mums, dads. Everybody, parents. We just want to normalise all the feelings, all the emotions, everything that happens. Let's get talking, and that's what we're all about.
We need to talk after 2, Jodie.
I know.
I'm gonna try again with Amelie. I've got a feeling you've got more of a consistent connection right now, so I'm going to get the question in. From your experience, your view, how do men keep going through the period of supporting their partner who's going through mental health, postnatal mental health problems?
I think, and I don't know whether this is a male trait, but it's very much for us. It was very much just get on with it, get heads down, go to work, come home, cook tea, sort the kids out, not have that time or space to really think about them, because there was so much thought towards managing my care, the kids' care, liaising with my mum to make sure that I wasn't left on my own, and there wasn't. He probably didn't have the time or the space to think about himself, and it wasn't probably until afterwards, which I think is what we found very much when we were talking after cracking, that it was then that there was that reflection. And I think it's almost that post-traumatic stress disorder, that they've lived through this horrendous experience, and then you're feeling better, and then all of a sudden their role changes, and so that's strange enough, because then not having to do all of these jobs, and it almost gives them that time and space to think, which is good, but also then that's when the cracks appear, and then they don't necessarily want to say anything because they can see that you're recovering. But I wonder whether that's fundamentally a physiological difference between men and women, in that, that there is that, when we look at guys that go to war and the PTSD, and the feelings come afterwards, because there's not the processing when the event's happening. Whereas I think, and I don't know whether this is more physiological or because of the way that boys are brought up, in that it's always, the idea is to kind of put those feelings away, but you can only do that for so long before you can only take so many Jenga blocks out before it falls down. And then, someone's got to be there to pick up the pieces. So I think that's my experience, really, is that it's afterwards, and then I think it comes out in straight different ways. There's kind of other triggers that trigger kind of memories for them that are traumatic. Sorry, my dog. My dog is trying to, just to lighten the mood, my dog is trying to hump my arm. No.
When I listening to you speak, Emily, I was reminded of episode 3 of Cracking, when Jodie's colleagues Andy and Stefan from Dads in Mind are talking about the 3rd episode, and about what do you do once your partner has recovered. It's almost like you don't want to break something that's quite fragile. And what they were sort of reflecting upon was the sort of taking that leap of faith that actually, okay, it's not going to break it, but perhaps it will strengthen, what we have. But actually your sort of gut instinct is, I just want to leave well alone, everything's all settled. She seems happier. She seems more like her old self. Let's just not go there. But if there are things that aren't dealt with, then come another pregnancy, for example, which could be a big trigger, or any other life event, that recovery could become quite fragile again, couldn't it?
So don't rock the boat aspect.
Yeah.
It's interesting because there was a discussion on the neonatal unit page today on Facebook, and a photograph of the bedroom that the parents get to stay in, and one of the mums had commented, lots of people have commented, and it was actually the same room that we stayed in I stayed in when we had Darcy, and one of the mums had commented and said, when we were in the neonatal unit, there was a lot of focus on us as parents, and then since leaving, all the focus had been on her, and there hadn't been any support for her partner, and how difficult that had been, because obviously having a baby very early is really traumatizing, and it just really kind of resonated with me, and it felt really poignant that that had come up today. And I think some of the things, you know, I know with lockdown, there's been lots of discussions about how it has brought that to the forefront, and that there's been some times when dads haven't even been able to go to appointments with their partners, and it just seems that we're still battling this indifference between, you know, it's still not an equal. Oh, sorry, dog.
And it's 10 times harder for neonatal for parents in the first year, as evidence. There's at times shameless self-promotion, but that's why we started the neonatal version. So of our product goes into the neonatal unit to help dad understand what's going on, because it can cause PTSD, severe trauma, and just to give him the language to help to communicate with mum about what's going on.
Definitely.
It's such a shocking state of affairs when you suddenly end up there in that unit where mum might not even be there yet, and you're there with a baby in this new unit with all these flashing lights, and they've all gone off to look after the baby, and he's sat there. What's going on? And if that's your first introduction to maternity, wow.
That was, you know, you completely nailed our experience, and that I was really poorly. So, you know, our Paul was had that experience where he was like, "Oh, do I go and see the baby, or do I go and see her?" Or, you know, and there's no physical attention. Is so much on the mum and the baby.
And where it links into the narrative of men, as you talked about, just having to get on with it, often those midwives and neonatal nurses of a certain type would just say to him, "Are you coming then? Are you going to come with your baby?" As if, you know, come on, get going. Not, "Oh, I'm sorry, this is going to be, right, let's figure out how you're feeling and move you on that way." Because they don't have the skill, time, or training, or tools to speak to the men in that way. And yeah, it'd be nice if we could change some of that.
Absolutely.
And I'm aware that you know, cracking is a story about a heterosexual couple, but I think some of what you're talking about for, you know, with regards to dads is also applicable to, you know, partners in same-sex relationships or whatever, that the focus is less on the partner, whether they're male, female, or whatever, and always more on, you know, on the mum and the baby. And that's a very isolating and alienated position to be in, I think.
Well, I think people are trying to move towards family integrated care, particularly on neonatal, and they are moving towards the Think Family model, the triangle, and they are calling this year the year of seeing the world through the baby's eyes. So it's whoever is above them, whoever those parents are, whoever's in the house, all we're asking for is parity in care. Not even information, just care of those people as a unit, because that's what the baby's going home to. So that's how we should be thinking of it. Yeah, I mean, we're helping to try and fight that same-sex partner pads that we're creating as well with lots of same-sex organisations, because they can't get the voice yet. But it is whoever is around that baby needs that looking after too, as a family unit, to understand the dynamics a bit more. After all, isn't that what we do when people come to us in crisis? So they come to us in crisis, and don't we try and look at the whole picture for them? Why aren't we doing that at the beginning? It can't compute, really.
Okay, everybody, we are doing wonderfully. We're perfectly on time, and it's going. So we're going to take a break. It's kind of intuitive. We're going to have so 8:40. So see you after the break.
You might want to pop it in the chat, Mark, because you're cutting out a little bit. A lot.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. We are continuing the second half of our discussion on fathers' perinatal mental health, based around the audio drama Cracking. Fingers crossed, internet will hold out for the next 45 minutes. And I've got a cup of tea, if not. So we're going to move on to clip number 3. So this is a scene when Sam confronts and acknowledges his own mental health illness before subsequently getting the support he needs. Are we struggling here?
I get these moments where I look at her and I think, fuck, you were in that place and you got out of it, but I got through all that. So why now it feels like I'm in a different place and I don't know how I'm going to get out of it. I just love her to bits and I just don't want anything to... I don't want her to leave.
Okay. So, that's quite difficult. Listen, that clip. So we're going to talk about how he was feeling then, but we also want to kind of think about how you move on from that as well, how you get through that illness and kind of what happens next. And then we'll move on to the final bit will be about some of the things we've already touched on, which is the sorts of support and sorts of mechanisms we need in place. So the question kind of to prompt the discussion in this final section is, what is the lasting impact of mental health difficulties and how do you move on? That's the question. Who would like to start us off, or shall I pick somebody? Jodie, would you mind?
I was going to jump in, and when you don't want to be that person, like, yeah. I mean, I say I was going to jump in. It was only really I think just listening to that clip really resonates, and I think for parents in general, I mean, we use this like old self a lot, and we say like, when will mums get back to their old self, or dads will say, when will she get back to her old self? And for me, I found that quite a difficult term, because for me, I was like, I could never be my old self. I'm not that person anymore. I've changed, and actually dealing with that was part of getting better. And I think for dads, what happens sometimes is there's a disparity between mum and dad, where mum goes on this journey of a new self and dad's kind of waiting for her to get back to the old one. And I think that can sometimes stop that progression for dads and mums as well, but keeping it in with dads. But yeah, just sometimes I think it comes back to them being that little bit left behind, and that lasting mental health difficulty is, what do they do then? How do they start to fix that and talk and kind of get a bit better? But yeah, so I suppose just to kick it off with that, I mean, it's a huge question. I want to answer it really clearly, and I really feel like I can't. So yeah, for me, I think there are huge implications, and they're all very, very different, completely depending on your circumstance. But yeah, they can be big.
So sort of the idea of the lasting impact is to sort of find that new post-illness self and to get to know that person to some extent. Yeah. Nicola, I wonder if you'd had any views about kind of moving on past the kind of mental health illness. Are you there? I think we might be having some internet connection issues there, Nick. What?
I think we might be on mute, actually.
Oh, yeah. Okay, go for it, Nick. What?
Right, how's that? Can you hear me now? So you can hear me. Honestly, one thing I don't like about these, I hate technology when it comes. I much prefer being in a room with people. You can know what I'm saying, you know what I'm doing. I don't have to worry about that. But that's a whole other story. So first and foremost, when it comes to mental health specifically, I can talk about it from my perspective and also what we do as an organization. So trauma, and the reason that I bring that up as well is that's one of the long-lasting impacts of mental health problems. So I'm somebody who's been impacted by trauma through the bereavement of my brother, who died by suicide a few years back. One of the reasons that we actually started the Delicate Mind, in fact, the reason we started the Delicate Mind was around that foundation and the purpose of putting purpose to the pain that happened at that time. The way that's informed itself with me, and also how we found out what other people have been impacted by different forms of trauma, because let's remember that trauma isn't just something that's just one universe. It happens in a multitude of ways. It infests the body and the mind. So often you get a bang, and obviously a person will respond by being jittery, or within the mind, as in someone might feel uncomfortable or anxious or unable to be able to have a conversation. And this is something which is a long-term thing. I think people must understand the trauma itself, the way it informs itself is so radically different for so many different people, and we mustn't forget to realize that just because so I'm fine, I'm excellent, my not great anymore. I have very, very peculiar dreams. There are a long-lasting impact that these things tend to have. But again, it isn't all doom and gloom. There are solutions to help to make yourself mind. I'm quite. I like to practice quite a bit, and something that I advocate to a lot of people is the sense of brain work. So how to think differently and to go into different manners. So one thing that I do on a regular basis, on a daily basis, in fact, different practices. So one of them I exercise, I read, I meditate. I have a gratitude journal, and the reason that that is important is because that helps your neural pathway strengthen and literally makes your brain start to think differently. And I've been doing was effectively an experiment on myself. I really wish I'd sort of taken a scan of my brain a year before I started doing it, because they've basically, since that time, I wake up every morning, I think back on the day that's just gone, and I'll say, yesterday I was grateful for, and I'll list it. I'll think about what happened, and this will definitely go in our gratitude journal as one of the things I'm going to be grateful for as well. And the reason that that is important is because it helps to help regulate your thought patterns, your brain, your mind to go in a different capacity, to go into different kind of ways. So that is one thing that I would advocate for myself and as to people. But I would also make sure that everybody is aware that different mental health conditions and different traumas have different severities to them. So I think it's very important that that is understood, and that there are different forms of solutions and different forms of therapies that people can take that are beneficial to them. The situation is individual and relative to your situation as to who you are and where you are. For me, therapy was excellent, and my gratitude journal and my exercise and reading continues to be as well. But again, everybody's an individual. We know what works, doesn't, and if you don't know what works for you, go and find it. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and that does open up the next sort of set of questions, really, around the sorts of support, the sorts of therapy that is appropriate for fathers. You know, is a feminized version of therapy and support appropriate for men, and will they engage with that? And I guess, you know, I want to open it up to people, really. What sort of support, what sort of interventions, what sort of mechanisms are needed?
Or whatever support that there needs to be, it needs to have an approach that's born out of understanding what men are capable of doing and achieving, so they have to be realistic. So we don't want to impose a set of strategies on this emerging population of new fathers who are suddenly, we're going to be opening up like a can and saying, right, we're here to support you. We want to think father, we want to think partner, and it needs to come from them. And then you've got to figure out what therapies are going to work, rather than trying everything under the sun, or the things that have already been tried and tested, as you said, predominantly different populations. But we do know that obviously certain therapies work very well. So you have a suite of therapies that you could use. The point being is that the earlier you get them to the support, the easier it is. So that should be the focus at the same time, is that trying to get the early help as possible, as possible, by recognise, and then you'll find much more information about how to work with all the nuances of each kind of family dynamic. Whether there's cultural difference, whether there's pre-existing conditions, that have been discovered. Men with ADHD not diagnosed till 40, yet they don't think it impacts them as a new father. Of course it does. They need to be stopped before they head off on some self-destructive behaviour. There's lots of different therapies. If I've understood the question correctly, after what Nick was saying, then yeah, I'm really happy that there's lots of different therapies to be used, but it needs to be a kind of co-produced approach, really, from the population, because I think you're going to find there's a lot more to it than we think.
Yeah, I mean, our Dads in Mind team are, obviously I'm very biased. They are fantastic, and I think in terms of loosely using the word, we wouldn't call it therapy as such, but our peer support, our dads who have got lived experience, so they come from a really warm place before they've even started, and then obviously they do have training in managing anxiety, CBT, kind of postnatal depression, and we work really closely with them to try and equip them with those tools at a very grassroots level, I suppose. They are just dads, in quotations, that want to support other dads. And I think that's such a powerful thing. And our dads run groups as well. Obviously, at the moment, they're on the wonderful Zoom. But normally we have a monthly meet at our Bluebell Place hub. And the dads come together and they have pizza. And the premise of that is, yes, come along, and if the conversation turns to what's going on for you, then great. You might find somebody who can empathize with that and you can relate to and can offer support that way. Or you might just come in and chat about what you had for dinner last night. It's so open and, a really safe space for dads to come together. So yeah, I think for us, our dads know where to signpost. So talking about whether a dad has ADHD or is dad's autistic or whatever might be going on for dad outside of postnatal, perinatal, they can signpost on then to, the right support. And again, they still stand by dad through that, getting into that service. Our team are there to support them in that transition. And it's a lot of hand holding, and for some dads that's enough, and others go on to have more specialized therapy, and hopefully go on to start their journey.
I think my point is that there's not enough existing currently. You're nowhere near it. You're 5%, if that, because if you just look on Twitter, there's IHV training. Fantastic that we're starting to think and looking at including fathers, thinking family and partners. So if an organisation as big as that is only coming to grips with the need for this, to actually take these men who are in this vulnerable state and with their raw new emotions that they can't verbalise, and then hand them to signposted organisations who don't know as much as you do with your great local produced support service like Bluebell, or Nickwatts, then they're not going to interact with those men in the way potentially that actually solves their whole problem with the dynamic of their family. It's very focused on him and that in that way, if you see what I mean. What I'm saying is, as Emma talked a lot earlier, we've got to make it so normal that when you're having a baby, it's a very difficult time, and the goal is down the line, 10 years, 15 years down the line, that when we look back and ask our question again, what's the lasting impact of mental health difficulties that people exist, it's that people have got through them and gained strength from it and have formed these new ways of people that they are as a family, and they have learnt to build resilience and mental health resilience from it. And so, I mean, I'm all for these initiatives, and we've just got to kind of band together somehow to form the awareness raising that needs to happen among all the agencies that interact, and be on the same page and fight for the same amount of voice, because it's severely lacking in coming towards us. But that's what we're trying to change, I guess, isn't it, really?
Yeah, we work a lot with health professionals. You know, I think there is this big, I know it might not seem like it, you know, in a huge way, but there really is this, that we'll call it an underground movement and a tremor that is going on at the moment. You know, we work really closely with health professionals, health visitors, midwives, and yes, we are, you know, we're Bristol, Bath, North Somerset, down in Devon. You know, we're creeping in, you know, not just us, all of these grassroots, you know, organizations are starting to get these conversations to happen at midwife appointments, you know, when the health visitor goes round, you know, how is dad, you know, all of this training is coming in. But it's just, you know, it's got to gain some momentum. Like, you're completely right.
Absolutely.
You know, it's getting there.
Well, we're 7 years in on our project, and we're in 20 trusts by the end of the year, all over the country. And so I've been directly training with midwifery services and health visiting services from Kent all the way up to Manchester, all the way through East Midlands and the whole of South West. It's coming to Bristol soon.
Right.
And the point being, I still noticed that the surrounding organisations that I'm hoping they'll forward dads to don't quite exist yet, because they still haven't been given the right funding or an in to the maternity world to allow them to understand what needs to be done. And that's why I'm trying to get the dads to say, and through things like this radio edit of the play, it's about making sure that the dads in those places know that this is something normal to talk about it, but they've got to have these services to talk to. And that's why I'm hoping if these men start talking, then these services will start being built even stronger. But that's what we've missed. We haven't had that engagement that you're training your local midwives, your perinatal team and your clinical network there to try and get them to be really father inclusive and part inclusive by hashtag how are you dad, and here's some questions you can ask them and those kinds of things.
I think it is starting though. I'd agree with Jodie that there's things are happening. I mean, I can only speak for sort of what I know in the Warwick sphere, but I know of researchers who are focusing now specifically on perinatal health and focusing, you know, specifically on the well-being of dads, particularly in Warwick Medical School, for example. So I think it's happening. It's just working together and coordinating that is really important. And I think this idea of co-production, you know, I'm already a really big fan of it. I think it's the way forward. It's about us all bringing our own experiences and our own knowledge base, not sort of working in silos, but actually bringing it all together. And also, you know, this value of peer support, I think it's so powerful. Just from my own work with a group of dads at the moment, we've been doing Zoom conversations and creating videos where dads are just talking about their experiences, and they're going to be sort of on YouTube for other dads to access, just where they talk about what's gone on for them and what's worked for them in the past, and just looking back over their experience. So I honestly feel like we are going in the right direction.
Absolutely.
And I agree with that. I was thinking about the work that Hugh and I have been doing with All Right Mate is that we have found with a number of other projects that we have done alongside this piece about postnatal illness, is that when we've been promoting the play and talking to people, there's a real appetite to talk about mental health stuff. You know, people are wanting to talk about it, but it's just, where do you find the outlet for that? And one thing that really struck me when I spent one day walking up and down quite a busy sort of high street in Exeter to promote the play that we were putting on later on that week. So I was going into the pizza shop and the tattoo parlour and the butcher shop and the barber shop, and nearly everybody on that street had lost someone to suicide. They'd had some experience of that, and wanted to talk about that, wanted to find some ways in which we could prevent this from happening, because it is an absolute national tragedy, really. And I don't know if Hugh wants to say any more about the work that we've been doing, but we've often found that what drives people to participate in some of our projects is a sense of, I've been through something difficult, and if I could help somebody with that experience, then, that's my motivator. I don't know, Hugh, if you wanted to talk a bit about the sort of barbershop poster sort of project that we've been doing, which is, again, very sort of low-key awareness raising of, creating spaces where men could talk more openly about their mental health.
Yeah, so I think, so the barbershop posters, what they essentially are posters that go in barbershops, and on them there are portraits of a range of participants who we've worked with, and a QR code, a web link that gives people access to these audio files, which are created of loads of excerpts of conversations that we've recorded with blokes about different topics. So there are different sort of themes posters, and we've got some that are about to go out into the construction industry. So they're posters for construction sites where you scan the thing, and here what we kind of hope for a lot of people. Well, we don't hope this, but we acknowledge for a lot of people might be the first time they've heard people with similar life experiences to them talk about mental health, and not only hear one person do it, but hear a kind of cacophony of people doing it, in the aim that it might not necessarily be that makes them suddenly go out and seek help, but it means that if one day they do get to a crossroads where they don't know whether or not they should seek help, or a friend of theirs should seek help, that normalization will hopefully just nudge them towards being a bit more proactive and a bit less fearful of judgment. But what we kind of found very early on with these conversations were, and pre-COVID they were all in person, is people would sign up to have these conversations that would be recorded with us, and then they'd arrive and they'd be quite quiet and quite almost reluctant to talk. But there was something really interesting there, because you thought, well, you've signed up for this, so there's clearly something. And it was only when the conversation moved towards what advice might you give other blokes that suddenly all of these life experiences came out. And that's kind of, for us, when the penny drops a bit, that there's this kind of idea potentially that there's some sort of mutual exclusion between helping yourself or helping others, and that maybe people oftentimes categorize people into two groups: those who seek help and those who give help. And I don't know about, this might be a generalization, but blokes have this kind of mindset sometimes where everything needs to be fixed and everything needs to be solved, and therefore the aspiration is usually to be in the camp of people who help others. But usually by the end of those conversations, they'd actually done both, and necessarily both, because there's that kind of very mutual link between helping yourself and helping others, especially around these kind of more taboo topics of mental health. So that's kind of something quite interesting that we learned. I can't remember what the question really was, but I hope that kind of answers it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I was just saying that, you know, in our experience, we're finding as an art organisation that actually it's not too hard to get people to talk about this stuff. So I feel very hopeful about that in terms of, you know, perhaps addressing some of the things that we've already talked about, you know.
Yeah, I think there's a really good time to just kind of say for anybody, you know, and panel included, you know, to a big show of how things are changing. You know, we've just started to create the Hearts and Minds partnership. I don't know if anybody's aware of this yet. So Bluebell, Acacia and Smile, 3 organisations in the perinatal mental health sector, voluntary. We're creating a map, an online map of all the support available, you know, within England for parents, which we're hoping is going to obviously be huge, you know, and that's dads included, you know, so they'll no longer have to go through these pathways, you know, that we talk about. And I think health professionals, we could be really guilty of talking about these pathways all the time. And you have to go to your GP, and then you have to get referred to here, and then you have to go here. And I mean, when you're not feeling great already, you know, that's a huge thing to have to ask even one person what you should do, let alone going through a process. So yeah, fingers crossed that's going to be something that's going to be really helpful and, you know, really useful going forward for mums and dads.
It's really great to hear, and I wasn't trying to be negative. What I was trying to think of was a dose of reality in the world that I've seen in the last 7 years, kicking all these doors down as much as I can for partners. And it's just a case of, someone talked about, I think it was Emma, talked about some silos, or talking about we've got to be more collaborative. Now, my experience tells me that paternity, maternity, or just having children cuts across perinatal mental health networks, safeguarding organisations, maternity services, public health teams too. And all those are quite separate out there, and they work as separate organisations. In some areas, they work much more collaboratively than others. So we have to keep the pressure up to build the message. We've got this Fathers Reaching Out report, a 10-year report that we presented to the MPs. It's actually going in front of all 650 MPs. Mark Williams's report that we sponsored, and we can send you a copy that gathers all the evidence about the importance of fathers in the perinatal period and their mental health. So the pressures keep going, and we've got to keep running, and we've got to think about succession, and we've got to grow, and we've got to do all those things. And it is happening. And Emma, your point about research is fantastic. I've had so many students come to me and ask for some stuff for their dissertations in the last 4 or 5 years. But that's what I'm saying. It's been 4 or 5 years. I'm still getting people in universities coming forward and asking, I want us to focus on dads. I want to do this. But we've not had a national speak out about the partner bit. And I think that's what we need, a little bit of a shove to say, let's speak out more about partners and families as a whole, rather than it being more piecemeal. Because then at that point, we know it's a bit of a tipping point, and it's out there. Just as we want these genuine emotions to come and moments to come from dads and their emotions, we want there to be a moment where partners are recognised in that journey as, you know, equally a part of that picture. So great to see how it develops, and please feel free to get in touch with any organisations you want put on our DadPad app. So every area we're in, we can refer dads straight out to your organisations as soon as they come through the maternity gateway.
And I think this idea of what you would call family systems thinking, so actually thinking about all of the members that exist within a family unit. You know, we don't live in a vacuum, we don't live in isolation. It's actually quite a new concept within psychology in itself. Understanding that we don't just have an influence on people, they have an influence on us. And it's now starting to filter through into practice.
Window.
And also, I think when we think about, you know, what is the lasting impact, it's not just thinking about the impact on that parent who is experiencing those difficulties. It's actually thinking about the long-term impact for children's outcomes as well. And there are many longitudinal studies that show that parental stress is a significant risk factor for children over time. And it's just getting that message through. We're not just focusing on one person in that family unit. We're trying to look after everybody.
We're back to the adverse childhood experiences, aren't we? ACEs. So But this concept's been known for years within social care and social services, but it's not filtering through to where these new parents are being formed. And that's where the training, and that's where the argument is to try and put a bit more money and training into those early years, that we've all been advocating for, because they look after our baby's brains.
Yeah, and I think actually, that's a really, really strong point, Emma. And one of the things that I do is, so with my first, I was really unwell, and actually I'm a really good evidence piece for the effect that has on your child. My son couldn't make eye contact. He didn't know how to express emotion with his face. He didn't talk until he was 4. He couldn't put pen to paper. And that was with a lot of work, genuinely down to the experience he'd had as a child. I never made eye contact with him. I never expressed any real emotion towards him. His needs were never met because I was unwell. And I think, that's going off, apologies slightly on a tangent there, but I think it goes hand in hand with the effects this has on dads and those conversations around bringing dad in. But you're so right. In between and equal to all of that is the effect that this is having on infant development, and their experiences later on. And I really love that you've brought that up, actually. It's a good subject close to my heart, that.
And I think to the point about succession and sort of early training and so on, and I mentioned the module that I teach at Warwick around men, masculinities and young children and fatherhood. And that's it's a really popular module, and that's full of students who will go on to be education professionals, who go on to be psychologists, who will go on to be social workers, who will go on to work in that field. And students are really into it and they really care about this topic. And I think this kind of idea of an underground sort of movement, this idea of a kind of a rumbling, I think it's there. There are lots of students working and studying in that area want to know about this. They want to know about the dad's role in the family, the dad's role in the upbringing of young children, and as children get older, they care really a lot about it. They just don't know about it. And so, to that point of succession and the next generation of health, education, social work professionals, that focus is for me at teaching undergraduates. One part of that.
Forward-thinking lecturers like you to bring it out there.
Thank you. I'll pay you later. Cheers.
I'll just touch on that. I did a masculinities module in my own education studies early degree, and fathers were classed, this is only going back sort of 15 years ago, as hard to reach. That was how it was taught to me. Fathers are hard to reach. And I think we've come on a lot from that idea that actually they're not necessarily reluctant, they're not necessarily hard to reach. Actually, we haven't been directly engaging with them or asking them directly about how they feel.
We need to build a workforce that also is able to engage. And we've got to bring more men into maternity. We've got to bring more of a joint approach as well, so that there's understanding. I'm just talking about the groups I used to run. They were always co-facilitated, male and female. So equality-based program, which lends itself to objectivity, and people are able to check with each other quite clearly whether they're on message. So you're not skewing, you're not biasing anything. And there's lots of training that needs to happen. So that branding of hard to reach is a difficult one, isn't it? It closes the lid rather than opens anything up. It puts them in a box. But we're people, and we can figure it out if we're given the tools to do so.
I think it's very much, like Emma and Mark, I think I'm so excited by the sort of next generation of, health professionals. And, I do genuinely feel quite passionate about the fact that I do feel like we're having these conversations. We are making those, to go back to that movement, that rumble. I don't think it's going to happen. And I do totally agree with you, Julian. It's going to be so slow and so small and, but it's moving. And I think I'm so excited to see those changes. I think are going to start happening quite fast in the next couple of years. But at the moment, they're just sort of ticking over very quietly. But it's so nice.
Slow can be good, can't it? Slow could be good because we're doing a deep dive into it now, and we can keep an eye on it. And it's not just something comes in with something sweeping and goes, right, that's the new blueprint, we can at least try and build it collaborative and try and get it right. Because I think this is our one chance in the UK for the next 15 years to get this right. If I'm being honest, with maternity transformation money going at the end of next year, because we've had 5 years of it, then where's the money going to come from for keeping looking at this as a subject in maternity? It'll only roll around again in commissioning cycles 10, 15 years down the line, so unless we look at a different way of funding it. But at the moment, there's a big tranche of money to change it, and it's 5 years, and we're now in year 5. So we've got to find a way to keep it going, so it will slow down.
And I mean, and that's why I feel really passionately about the role of arts in, in addressing issues around well-being and addressing health inequalities. And we had an earlier version of Cracking that was called Friction, which was a training piece, and we trained probably over 1,600 healthcare professionals, midwives, health visitors, mental health nurses, and I think it was based, the story was based on a lived experience, but we were able to fictionalize that and use it in a forum theatre type context, so that delegates could actually ask the actors, questions when they were in character, so that you could try things out without perhaps sort of worrying that you might be saying the wrong thing. And I think the one thing that that really stood out for me was that in a 20-minute performance piece and then a 20-minute facilitated interactive discussion actually shifted practitioners' hearts and minds and put dads at the forefront of their thinking in a way that perhaps, a PowerPoint presentation or a paper or some other sort of training tool was not.
You can't even mention them in the same breath, Callie. Don't mention PowerPoint and what you put on in the same breath. The power, and they're talking about group work, the power of face-to-face and the power of group work. I remember in probation, we used to pay to get Geese Theatre come in and do the masks for the domestic violence perpetrators. The power of just putting on those masks and performing and being a mirror right before their eyes, so powerful. So there is such a role for content such as yours to play a role in what I know we hate a bit of technology, Nicola, but the future is going to be content and YouTube and theatre and video and those kinds of things, plus group work, plus face-to-face. So we've just got to learn how to do it well. I'm getting tired even thinking about it.
Absolutely.
So,
okay, we're close to the end of our allotted time, so it feels like a kind of a natural place to stop there. Although I might just give a moment, if anybody has any burning things they want to add just to round us off, then now's your time to speak out. Okay, great. You've said everything you felt like you needed to say. That's good news. Okay, so just to the audience.
Well, I was actually I was going to.
Oh, sorry, go for it.
Oh, sorry, don't worry, there's a delay. I was just going to say it's actually been really nice to be able to hear from everybody today. I've really enjoyed hearing your perspectives and your opinions and the work that you guys are doing as well. So the work doesn't exist in a silo. We're all just doing different things individually and we'll work for this common purpose. And it's been really nice to hear from all of you. So thank you for giving me the space.
Thank you, Nicola. Yeah, absolutely. It's been fantastic, hasn't it? Such great contributions, great to hear different organizations speaking the same kind of language and rumbling along on the underground. Okay, so we're gonna wrap it up a bit. If in the audience, if you've watched this live and you signed up in advance, then you'll be emailed a short evaluation survey from the Economic and Social Research Council. It will be fantastic if you completed that. We'd really appreciate that. Appreciate your views. Remember that you can contact the organisations represented here for more information. So that's DadPad, that's Bluebell, The Delicate Mind, and All Right Mate. The Twitter handles are on the screen right now. The last thing we'd like to ask people out there watching this to do is make a pledge, just a small thing, just one step at a time, that you can do to make some of these challenges we've been discussing tonight feel more manageable for either yourself or for others. You can keep that private, or it would also be great if you could post your pledge in the comments below the video. So we can see what sort of impetus for change our discussions might have had. So the comments will stay open, and it'll be great to see those pledges. Thank you. So we've come to the end. I want to extend a big thank you to all of our panelists. So we've got Julian Bowes, Jodie Dowse, Amelie Foster, Nikwat Marawat, Dr. Emma Langley, and of course, Hugh McCann and Callie Hayes from All Right Mate. Thank you for cracking. Remember, that's still going to be available on the All Right Mate website to listen to. And as if by magic, that's web address is on screen now. So thanks to everyone for watching live. Thanks if you're not watching live too. And take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.